welcome to This Week in Travel. I'm your host Michelle Robson, editor of Turning Left for Less. This week I'll be looking at the latest travel news as well as flying on Air France in business class. I flew from Dubai to Paris and then onwards to London with Air France recently, so I'll be having a look at that, how I paid for it on Virgin Miles. Plus, since we're talking about Air France, who are a member of Skyteam, I thought we'd take a quick look at the changes to the Virgin Atlantic scheme now that they've become part of Skyteam and what benefits you can get if you hold Virgin Atlantic status. In the news this week, there's been lots of news about lounges. So, for example, at Terminal 3, unbelievably, is now another One World lounge to visit. It's one of the previous ones that was open prior to COVID that is now due to reopen, which is the American Airlines First Class Lounge. Now, this was never the most exciting lounge, I'll admit. The colours are a little bit drab maybe, there's a lot of grey as you would expect with American Airlines. However, I really liked the food here. There was a nice buffet selection and a good order menu as well with some nice breakfast dishes when I'd been in. And I always found the staff in there really helpful and friendly, which I enjoyed. They had champagne. I think from memory prior to COVID it might have been Moet Chandon, so maybe it wasn't the best champagne, but it was still a very nice experience. They had a little sweetie bar, a bit like the business class American Airlines lounge, but that one had Lindt chocolates from what I remember. And also, if you're looking for somewhere to work, it was normally very quiet in there most of the time, and the Wi-Fi was really good in there. So it's worth considering as an alternative to some of the other lounges if they're a bit busy or you just want something a bit more chilled. We were expecting there to be a flagship lounge at Heathrow. They've been talking about that for a long time, but as yet there's still no time frame. And I think having refreshed the business class lounge, I'm not totally sure whether we're likely to see that in the next year or so. But obviously stay tuned to Turning Left for Less, and if we hear anything, we'll let you know. Also on the subject of lounges, there's been a development with the new lounges at Terminal 8 of JFK in New York. So British Airways moved terminals at the end of last year to join American Airlines to make it easier for people to connect onto onward flights in New York. And they're also joined by Iberia and Finnair in that terminal as well. So they built two new lounges, one for first class passengers and one for gold card holders. But they also have the old lounge that used to be called the flagship lounge. Now that's called the Greenwich Lounge now, and it's for, in terms of British Airways, silver card holders, those travelling in business class and One World Sapphire members. Now they've added a couple of things that I think are quite interesting. They've added a proper bar. Previously it was just a help yourself bar. Now they actually have a bar called the Bridge Bar, which does cocktails. Their main focus is aviation gym, which I know may not be everybody's favourite. I actually really like it, but I know a lot of people that find it too floral. And it will also be Betty Buzz tonic as well. And now the story behind those is that Ryan Reynolds is actually the owner of Aviation Gin, and his wife Blake Lively, who you might remember from original Gossip Girl, she is actually the founder of Betty Buzz tonic. So they kind of go together a bit like the marriage. So you can check those out, and also a range of cocktails if you visit the Greenwich Lounge. They've also introduced something similar to what they used to have in the previous lounge at Terminal 7, in that they have a kind of upscale tap room that they're calling the tasting room. So if you like your beer, it's going to be the Brooklyn Brewery that's featured there, and there's a range of different beers. Plus you can order a beer tasting flight, which I quite like the idea of that. I'm not a big beer drinker, but I quite like the idea of just having a little small sample of quite a few beers. And they also have a different menu in there that you can order with a very intriguing sounding dessert, which is a beer float. I'm not totally convinced on that one. However, I did like the sound of the French onion cheese toasty. That sounded pretty good. So if you're a bit bored with the food in the lounge, you can always head into there and see what they've got. It doesn't sound very healthy, but it sounds quite fun. Also in the news, there's less good news where it looks like there's going to be more border force strikes. Fortunately, when these have happened in the past, they haven't actually had a huge impact because the UK government has used the army to fill in. How long they can keep doing that is another matter, but Apparently Border Force are talking about trying to ramp up the strike action now, because obviously they're not actually getting there, because to be honest, I don't think most people even noticed they were on strike, because it was actually better, some people reported, than when they weren't on strike. There's also another strike action that's worth watching coming this week, where Heathrow workers in ground handling are voting to strike, which could be as soon as Easter, and there's 3,000 workers, so it's quite a substantial number of them, and the vote ends this Friday the 17th of March, so watch out for some news on that. I think it's highly likely they will vote for strike action. Whether it actually gets to the point of a strike is a different matter, because generally in the airports so far they've nearly always settled disputes with their ground handling staff, so fingers crossed it doesn't come to that. But definitely if you're planning to travel in the next month or so, worth keeping an eye out. They do have to give 2 weeks notice, so nothing should happen for the next couple of weeks, but there should be some news later this week. Also, if you're travelling to Germany, you may have heard that there've been some what I would call wildcat strikes, but legally they're allowed to do it with very short notice strikes. So you would want to keep an eye on the airline website just in case when you're travelling to Germany, because these things can happen with, sort of 24 hours notice. So definitely keep an eye on the airline website if you're travelling to Germany. Don't leave it till the last minute to check if it's all okay. And finally, I thought I'd give some context on the air traffic control strikes in France. Now, these have been going on. Generally, there's been a bit of notice, but I actually flew on a day when there were strikes, and you really wouldn't have known it. So Air France were told they must cut 20% of their flights, and they let people know probably about 2 days in advance which flights were cancelled. Like British Airways do, they concentrated on domestic and short haul flights. So if you're flying long haul with them, you're probably going to be okay. My flights actually both went fine, and one was a long haul, which they said they were not cancelling any long haul flights, but the second one was actually Paris to London, and that went okay. So the airport wasn't particularly busy, there was no chaos, it didn't appear to be particular disruption. I think because they handled it all quite a long time in advance, so actually it worked pretty well, I think. So if you are caught up in the strikes in France, providing your flight goes on time, actually you may well be okay. Well, I wanted to talk to you about flying Air France in business class, because I don't know about you, but I'd kind of heard mixed reviews of it and I wasn't really sure what to expect. I decided to use Air France because I had quite a lot of Virgin Flying Club miles, and you can use your miles with them. And especially now that they've got Skyteam membership, it means also that I can carry over my Virgin status to Air France as well, should I need it. It was pretty cheap actually. I booked it using my Virgin Flying Club miles, and it cost 50,000 miles one way and about £170 in taxes, which I think that's pretty cheap when you consider with British Airways, for some flights it can be around £800 return in tax, so sort of £400 each way. So I was quite happy with that. I thought that was quite a decent deal. As I said, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I got to Dubai and they fly out of Terminal 1 and they use a Skyteam lounge. Now this was extremely pleasant. I really enjoyed the lounge. It was a lovely, light, open space. It was reasonably busy, but not so much that you felt crowded. There was plenty of seats to find, and there was quite a decent breakfast there. I think the only thing I'd comment on is maybe it was a little bit European for me, because it would have been nice to see some more sort of local specialities. And I think I was a bit spoiled by the lounge in Oman that had the best buffet I've ever seen. So it was pretty good. I thought it was a nice lounge, pleasant space. There was magazines, space to work, and a nice breakfast spread and coffee machine. I also particularly like the wine library area, which you may remember if you've been to the London old Skyteam lounge, which is a really nice area where they display all the wines, and they had champagne naturally and some decent wines as well, which are all laid out so you can see them very easily. So that was good. Then when I got on it, to be honest, it was quite a shock because it was all very good. I really couldn't fault anything. What particularly surprised me was the crew, because sometimes I think Air France have a bit of a reputation of the crew not being particularly friendly, but I don't think I've ever had a more friendly crew. They were just absolutely delightful. They really couldn't do enough for you. They were smiling, they were friendly. Every time they served me something and cleared it away, they asked was it okay for me, which again, not something I've particularly seen on flights before, everything just worked. I had no complaints about the service whatsoever. So let's run a little bit about it in detail. So once I got on, I was flying on a 777. Now these have the reverse herringbone style seats. I was actually, again, quite surprised, having not seen them in real life, except many years ago when I did one of the new flights on a short haul hop. It was actually very wide, the seat, in terms of the footwell in particular. You know, a lot of these seats, particularly the reverse herringbone, tend to have quite a small footwell for when you're lying down. But actually, it was really wide and spacious and well padded. I found the seat really comfortable. It had good storage, which again is something that doesn't always happen, with a nice big cupboard that actually fitted my handbag that was at shoulder height, that had a mirror as well. You got an amenity kit. It had Clarins products. I think maybe it could have had a little bit more in it. It literally had a lip balm and a moisturiser, but I'm never going to complain about some free Clarins products. And it looked quite smart as well, so I was pretty happy with that. When we boarded, we got offered a choice of welcome drinks. Naturally, I had champagne. It was Duval Leroy, which is okay. I wouldn't say it's one of my favourites, but it's perfectly drinkable. So I enjoyed that. We had hot towels as well. The menu was really quite superb. There was a big choice of wines on there, some really nice wines that normally I'd expect to see in British Airways first class, not in business class. So for example, there was a Puy Fumé white wine, and there was also a very nice Bordeaux that I've seen on Qatar before that I really enjoyed. So no complaints about the drinks at all from me. The way they do the food is a little bit different. So you start with the champagne service, which I think, what a lovely touch. Yes, you may not want champagne, but you know, to come around with a tray of glasses of champagne in an elegant glass with these lovely little light cheesy snacks. It just feels luxurious to me, so I really enjoyed that part of it. And then obviously you could ask for something different to drink if you wanted, and then they come round and serve from a trolley. So it's a little bit like Finnair as well, and KLM, in that you don't get the choice of the starter, so you just get two different things. Now they did serve foie gras, which turned out to be very controversial when I posted about it on Twitter. So if you're offended by foie gras being on your tray, then perhaps you need to order a vegetarian meal or don't fly on Air France, because it was one of the two options on the tray. The other option was a really nice crab salad with sort of like a light mayonnaise dressing. I really enjoyed that too. There were warm baguettes, obviously, or mini baguettes, with a choice of rolls that they came round to no less than 3 times. They certainly like their bread on Air France, but I enjoyed the bread because it came with a really good Brittany salted butter as well, which I really enjoyed that. And then there was a choice of main courses with 3 different ones. I liked the fact that I could pre-order, and I was actually prompted to do it, which is unusual because a lot of airlines, they have pre-ordering, but they don't always actually tell you that very clearly. So yes, I had I think it was an email that came through a few days before saying, did I want to pre-order? And there was a meat choice, a chicken choice, I think, prawn, and I think the last one was pasta. I went for the prawns, which they described as being in a spicy sauce. I'm not sure I would call it spice, I would call it spiced rather than spicy, because it was mainly sort of saffron flavoured. Yeah, the prawns were big, they were tasty, they weren't too overcooked. It was a sort of tomatoey sauce, there was rice and some really nice fresh tasting spinach. So I really enjoyed that as well. And then for dessert, you actually get cheese and dessert. No choice again, all comes on the tray. And I know we kind of, or me especially, kind of complained about British Airways and their one tray service, but this doesn't feel like a get out. It feels like actually they're giving you more, and it gives the cabin crew more time to look after you rather than running backwards and forwards with different things. The cheeses were really good, as you'd kind of expect on Air France, but the only thing I would have liked, it doesn't come with biscuits. I'm guessing they expect you to use the bread, but personally I'd prefer to have biscuits. And the little desserts were absolutely delicious as well. There's like a little lemon tart and a little chocolate sort of bomb type thing. So yeah, it was very impressive overall. Wine came very freely, as you'd expect probably on a French airline. There were plenty of top-ups. You could swap wines as many times as you wanted. So I really enjoyed that part of it. The meal just was great. In terms of the comfort of the seat, I did have a little bit of a sleep, even though it was a day flight, because it was quite early in the morning we started. And I found the seat really comfortable. You don't get a mattress pad, but actually you don't need it. I found it reasonably soft. if you're in the right position, it comes with a pillow and a nice duvet that's quite soft. I'd say it's more of a quilt really because it's quite thin. For the second meal, again, there was no choice. So if you are vegetarian or vegan, you definitely need to order a special meal. It was reasonably substantial. It had a nice salad that sort of had grains through it and fruit and leaves. It tasted very fresh. And it was quite substantial as well. It wasn't like a tiny little sort of ramekin like you get sometimes on other airlines. And then you had 3 open sandwiches. One was slightly odd in that it was mango salsa, which I thought tasted quite nice, but not necessarily on bread. One was smoked salmon, and it was really good quality smoked salmon. And then they also had one of my personal favourites, Boursin cheese with black pepper, which I really enjoyed. The dessert was the chocolate bomb from lunch, so I thought they could have perhaps made a bit more of an effort and given you something a bit different. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. It all looks very visually appealing. I think with all the different elements on the tray in front of you, it does look good, and it's all very tasty. And again, the service was superb. At the end of the flight, they came around and actually both people that had been serving me thanked me personally. I mean, when was the last time you had that on British Airways? I personally can't remember anything like that. So I was really impressed, considering that the only status I have is like the lowest level in Skyteam, which is elite. And I'm not even sure at that point it was showing up, because it was just after the Skyteam had changed over. So I'm not sure if my Virgin status had translated over, because it certainly didn't look like it on the boarding pass. So it looked like they did that with every customer. Both cabin crew members were great, very friendly and helpful. Nothing was too much trouble. So I really can't fault it, if I'm honest. Then talking about Charles de Gaulle, I've heard a lot of horror stories, I have to say, about transferring at Charles de Gaulle, which kind of put me off a bit. But actually, when you're transferring Air France to Air France, there was no complaints again from me. There was no real queues. It was well organised. It wasn't too far to go between the 2 flights. And probably 10, 15 minutes, I was back through and ready to go to the lounge. I actually really liked the terminal there, which was 2E. The shop there is really nice. It's quite light in air. It feels modern. And the lounge is relatively new. I say relatively new. It opened before COVID, but I think it was around 2019 that it opened. And it still looks very fresh. It's got a nice buffet. It does get very busy. That would be my only complaint, is that sometimes looking around for a bit to get a seat, but you can get one eventually. And they have champagne. They have some nice wines there. The food was nice. So again, it was enjoyable. I think the only other thing I'd say is they do have a Clarins beauty clinic there, but when you looked at it, actually it was shut and it looked like there was no availability. So I'm not even sure if it's actually technically open. The next flight was very slightly delayed, but probably by about 15-20 minutes, and we actually made up the time in the end. Boarding was reasonably orderly. It wasn't big queues like you'd expect. And again, the cabin crew were very friendly. You were served a 1 tray kind of snacks. I didn't bother, but I had a look at my seatmates to see what they were getting. I just had some drinks and no complaints at all. Very similar to British Airways. You probably get slightly more food on British Airways, I'd say, but on a 45-minute flight, personally, unless I was absolutely starving, I don't really want to eat, because it's so hard to actually eat it without trying to sort of cram it down in the amount of time that you actually have, especially if you're not right at the front. In row 1 it's not so bad, but I was like row 4 because I booked quite late, so yeah, it would have been quite a rush to actually manage to eat it and have it cleared in before landing. But yeah, they were very good and came around with top-ups of drinks. So again, no complaints. My luggage, very interesting, when I got to Heathrow, came out almost immediately, which you don't see very often. There was no waiting around for it. It was there pretty much by the time we got to the carousel. And also of interest for those that have flown on British Airways through Terminal 5 recently and been stuck waiting for a gate and then waiting for someone to operate the gate. There was none of that with Air France. We got the gate straight away. Somebody was there with the air bridge operating it, and we were off pretty speedily. So overall, I would definitely recommend it. If you've never tried Air France and kind of been put off by it, by the mixed reports, they've really upped their game. And funnily enough, someone else said that to me who's a very frequent flyer, and I kind of trust their judgment. So yeah, they have been putting in a huge amount of effort to the food, to the service, and overall it was a great surprise. I'd definitely fly them again. If we want to compare between KLM, because I went outbound with KLM, I personally would go for Air France out of the two. There was nothing wrong with KLM at all. The crew were friendly, but I would say the wine and the food was definitely much better on Air France. Nothing wrong with the KLM stuff, just wasn't very exciting. So personally, I would go for Air France again, and definitely on those Virgin points, it's actually pretty cheap. So all in all, a success. So finally, I thought we would just have a little chat about the Virgin becoming part of Skyteam, since I've mentioned about the fact that I have Virgin Silver status currently, and that converts into Silver Elite. So Virgin joining Skyteam means that there's another 18 airlines that you can redeem on, and on top of the list of airlines you can already use your Virgin points on. So I actually think they're a better bet than British Airways in some ways, because British Airways you're a bit more limited. You've only got One World and like Aer Lingus, for example, whereas Virgin you've got people like Singapore Airlines, Hawaiian, ANA. There's a big choice there just on Virgin's own partners, let alone then the 18 members of Skyteam. Now they're a little bit more aimed perhaps at other countries in terms of connectivity, because other than Air France and KLM, if you're going short haul, there's not a huge amount you might use out of Skyteam, and more on long haul. So there is ITA, which is the new version of Alitalia, and they do have some nice modern A350 aircraft, but I've not heard a huge amount of feedback about them because they're still relatively young at the moment. There's Aeromexico is one of the long haul options that you might again think, actually, I'm not going to fly them. But funnily enough, we ran a review on Turning Left for Less, one of my writers, Jason, and actually having read it, I was like, oh, I would actually consider flying on them. It actually looked really good. Modern seats, decent food. So that's worth considering if you wanted to go somewhere that Aeromexico fly. There's also Korean Air. However, they are going to be merging with another airline, and we're not sure which alliance they're going to end up being in. So I definitely wouldn't pin your hopes on that. The other airline that I'll mention is Vietnam Airlines. Now, if you haven't flown them, I really like them. I've flown them a few times, not long haul, but short haul on quite a few flights. But I have actually seen their long haul seats, and they're very modern. They're the reverse herringbone seats. I find the crew absolutely delightful on these flights. Again, kind of what you'd experience in Vietnam. They're very friendly, helpful people. So great service. The food's generally very good. I'd say the only thing probably against it is kind of the wines and spirits tend not to be particularly exciting, but other than that they can have some good prices, and I think they're a really good airline. So I'm really pleased to have the option to use my Virgin miles or points now on Vietnam Airlines as well. As I mentioned, Virgin Flying Club Silver will translate into Skyteam Elite. Now, I always think that Virgin status actually isn't terribly useful unless you don't fly in business class. If you fly in economy or premium economy, then yes, it has some benefits. However, if you mainly fly in business class, then actually there's not a huge amount of point in having status, because pretty much all the perks you generally would get with business class anyway. So when we look at the perks that you get with Virgin Silver on Virgin, there is no lounge access with that. When we look at that on Virgin Atlantic with silver status, you do get the premium check-in, you get some extra luggage, and you get to select your seats, plus you get a 30% bonus on the miles earned. So it's not bad, but again, as I said, it's not particularly great if you fly business class anyway, because most of those are pretty much of no use. However, when we then think about it in terms of the Skyteam Elite, obviously you're more likely to fly in economy with them because you might be flying KLM or Air France on relatively short hops to Paris or Amsterdam, for example. So those sort of things actually would be more useful, I think. So with Skyteam, it's very slightly different, but you do get priority check-in, you get your free seat selection, and you also get an extra baggage allowance, which is always handy when you're in economy. If we look at the gold status for Virgin Atlantic, then you're getting some much better benefits. So, for example, you can always use the upper class check-in, you can use exit row seats for free, you get lounge access to the very nice clubhouse or the other Virgin lounges, and you can take a friend with you, and that's when you're on Virgin or Delta. So as well as a 60% top up on your points earned, I think Virgin is pretty useful. But again, most of it is to do with if you're flying in economy or premium economy rather than necessarily if you're flying business class. If we look at what it converts to in Skyteam, which is Skyteam Elite Plus, there are some really good things, particularly if you're flying in economy. So for example, you get, as well as the priority check-in, you also get priority immigration and security. Now obviously that's not going to be available everywhere, but where it is, to me, given the queues that we saw last year, and I think we're probably going to see again, that's actually a big perk for me. I certainly used it when I was at Amsterdam to come fly back on KLM a few months ago, and it definitely was incredibly quick. There was no queue at all, so worth considering that you actually get that perk. As well as that, you also get the typical extra baggage, and you also get the seat selection as well. So there's definitely some benefits to be had if you're going to fly on Skyteam, particularly if you're going to fly in economy. So make sure that you put your Virgin Flying Club number into the booking unless you want to credit to another Skyteam airline, and then you'll get the extra perks if you're in economy. So all in all, I think it's great news if you're a Virgin Flying Club member. If you're not, you may want to actually consider it now. I know most people generally like earning Avios because there's lots of places you can earn them for a start, and with British Airways doing a lot of short haul flights, it's kind of easier to redeem. But I think now with the Skyteam Alliance and Virgin, it opens up a whole world that wasn't there before. Air France and KLM, for example, are great for flying from the regions in the UK. So it means there's a lot more choice of flying from your local airport, which maybe you can't do with BA because they have a bit less coverage generally. And if you're going to have to change anyway, like with BA, you have to change at Heathrow if you want to go long haul and you live in the regions, why not change in Amsterdam, for example. Now, I know Amsterdam has a bad reputation for queues, etc., but if you're transferring from a non-Schengen flight, so that's one that's not within Europe, so the UK, for example, to another non-Schengen destination, for example, Dubai or Asia, etc., then it actually means that it's very simple to transfer. You don't have to go through security again. No passport control. You literally come out and just go straight to your gate. You couldn't ask for anything simpler. So there's no need to worry about queuing. The only thing that I would say is you will walk miles if you're unlucky, or if you want to go to the lounge. In my case, I typically landed very close to where my next flight was taking off from, but I had quite a long wait. So I had a good couple of hours, and the lounge was completely the opposite end of the terminal. So it was a long walk there and a long walk back, which kind of wasted time. But you can't really complain at the actual experience in terms of lack of queues, etc. It would be great if Amsterdam actually had more than one KLM lounge, considering how big it is. And when you look at how many lounges BA have, for example, just in Terminal 5, it'd be great if they actually considered that. But personally, I don't think that's likely anytime soon. So don't be put off by transferring in Amsterdam. And I said, as I talked about earlier, the same with Paris. If you're transferring from Air France to Air France, it was absolutely fine. Obviously, there will be queues at some times, but it was not an issue for me. So it was mid-afternoon, so it was a quiet time, but definitely don't be put off by that. Well, that's all for this week. Next week, I'm going to be talking about something quite exciting. I was really lucky yesterday in that I managed to go on an empty leg flight. Now, that is a private jet that is flying empty to go in position to pick up somebody. They sell these off very cheaply in comparison to actually chartering a private jet. It can still sound like a lot of money, but actually if you fill it, it can work out well within the realms of what you'd normally pay for business class, particularly on shorter flights. So, maybe thinking like what I did was London-Dublin, these sort of things can be affordable. So next week I'm going to talk about empty legs. I'm going to talk about what my experience is like and why it's so amazing to fly on a private jet, not just if you're an aviation geek, but just the whole experience, how it's so different from flying on a commercial flight. So join me then, and until then, happy travels.